Hello and welcome to another video on this channel in which I'm gonna review a new lens. So if you've watched my last videos, you already know I have a new lens, which is a wide angle lens. So I was processing some photos in those videos, as some of you already guessed which lens it is. But before I'm gonna show you the lens and do the complete review, let's start with a little blind test. So I'm gonna show you images taken with two lenses. So the new one and also the Canon 1535, which I've been using for more than half a year now, so a side by side. And yeah, we're gonna look at center sharpness and edge sharpness. And yeah, you can decide for yourself which side of the comparison you like more. And afterwards, I'm gonna reveal which was the new one, which is the Canon. And then I'm gonna continue with some more pixel peeping. And also I share my impression. Let's go. So we start our comparison here in the center of the frame. You see here one lens to the left, one lens to the right. So just take a few seconds to look at it and decide, okay, which shows more details? What do you like more? It's 100% view of a file coming from the R5, so 45 megapixels. And now I'm gonna move to the lower right edge. And here you see that on the left side I have a bit of a wider view, and I'm gonna explain later why. Actually, the lenses I compare are shot at the same focal length, but still there's a little difference, and I'm gonna explain why. But yeah, here we just focus on details and sharpness. So you see here on the right and the left have some text, some details here in the flags. Now we're gonna move to the top. Again, you see this side here is a little wider. Now to the left side. And finally the lower left. So you now saw the photos. Did you have a preference? Right side, left side? What did you like more? What looked sharper? I can now tell you. So on the left side you saw photos taken with this lens here, which is NiSi's first lens, the 15mm f4 lens, which I have here for the RF mount. Yeah, and on the right side it was the Canon 1535 at 15mm. So basically comparing this tiny lens against my workhorse lens, which I was using for more than half a year. And yeah, I have a little list here so I don't forget anything I want to talk about. So yeah, first of all, let's talk about form factor, weight and build quality. And yeah, to be honest, just look at this. It's quite tiny, especially if you compare it to the huge Canon lens. So it's maybe half the size, it's roughly half the weight, but what I have to say, it really feels solid. So it's a metal body, so really solid piece of equipment. And yeah, one nice thing about it, as also for the Canon lens, it has a flat front element, so you can really attach normal polarizers, and it even has just a 72mm front mount, so that's quite nice. So a wide angle lens where you don't need to use huge filters. So for me this would be a no-go. That's also why I like the Canon lens so much, because you can just attach normal filters, and the same is true for this lens, and this one is even smaller, so that's quite nice. Yeah, also build quality wise, all metal. Also back here the mount ring is metal. There's no weather sealing, so for a lens of that price, yeah, that's not much of a surprise. But yeah, would have been nice to have some rubber here, but still it's, as I said, solid, compact, and it doesn't take up much additional space in my bag. Now as for the availability of that lens, so I use it for the RF mount, so it's Canon RF, but I had a look, so it's also available for Nikon Z, Sony E, and however the Fuji mount is called. So all the mirrorless options are covered by this lens, and yeah, so that's quite nice. And now let's look at some of the stuff coming with that lens, which is not too much, but yeah, you have this lens hood, which also metal, so quite nice. You have a little pouch, and yeah, that's really it. That's all you need. I don't even need the pouch here. It goes into my backpack. Now, as to the operation, I think I said it's all manual. So you have scales in the front of the lens, and the lower one here, that's for the aperture, and then you have a ring to set the focus. So this means if you attach it to a camera, you can't control aperture via the camera, and also focus is manual. That's no big deal because this aperture ring is so smooth, it's like a battery smooth, but it has a nice click when you switch the aperture, so it's quite nice. And also the focus ring, the operation, yeah, it's very, very soft and smooth. And also for a manual lens, sometimes it's hard to focus, but for this lens it's actually quite nice because the scales you have, they tell you what the depth of field is for the different apertures. So you can look at the scale and this gives you an indication which area you would have in focus, which is quite nice. So for example, if you're at f8 and I set the focus, I know how far I have to turn it to get everything to infinity sharp, and it also will tell me, okay, what will be the closest focus. And to be honest, with such a wide lens, if you shoot f8 or f11, usually have nearly everything in focus, so not too much to worry about. Oh, it's manual focus. It's not a big deal with a wide lens in my opinion. Now let's see, what else do I have? Oh yeah, the price. Let's talk about the price. This lens, last I checked, it's less than 500 euros here in Germany. And yeah, I'm now comparing it against the Canon 1535 lens, which cost me 2,400 euros. So I'm not sure if it's a fair comparison, but we're gonna see. We do pixel peeping. I really show you close-ups. We're also gonna take this lens out to do some architecture photography, which is where I want to see the Sunstar produces, because this lens is, especially, it's advertised to produce very nice Sunstars, so with 10 spikes. And yeah, I really want to see it, also see how it compares to the Canon, because in the past it was always the Canon wide angle lenses producing the best Sunstars, and yeah, this one is gonna challenge it, so we're gonna see that. And yeah, did I forget anything? If I forget anything, yeah, I'll just add this throughout the review. One thing I definitely forgot to tell you is I didn't buy this lens. So NiSi sent me that lens for testing. So just as a little disclaimer here, this will still be an honest review as usual. Also, since I show you the 100% pixel peeping photos, you can just make up your own mind. So I will not try to influence you in any way. I just give you my honest opinion, and you can, yeah, build your own. So that's the best way a review should be. And yeah, we're gonna now jump right into it and continue with the pixel peeping. So the first photo I showed you in the test, it was taken at f8. And I think this is the sweet spot for the lens. Now, yeah, let's look at the other range. It starts at f4 and goes up to 22, and to be honest, I didn't even test the f16 or f22 because I never shoot at that aperture because of diffraction. But yeah, I'm interested in f4 to f11, and we're gonna compare that now. Now let's continue our pixel peeping with some other apertures. So the one I showed in the beginning was at f8, which I think is the sweet spot for the NiSi lens. Also f11 is quite good. And now let's just start at f4 and compare it to the Canon lens at f4. So let's just quickly make sure I have selected the right ones. So I'm gonna zoom in now again, and here again you see, if you look at the complete view, that the NiSi is quite a bit wider, or at least it appears wider. So in fact it is 14.5 millimeters versus 15 millimeters for the Canon, but still this wouldn't give so much of a difference normally in a real shoot. And we're gonna see this also later when we take some real world pictures. The reason why this is much more is I had the camera mounted fixed on the tripod and just exchanged the lenses, and as you saw, the NiSi lens is quite short, which means that the lens opening is farther away from the subject, and this I think plays into this difference we have here. Now let's pixel peep here for the f4, and we're gonna see something important. First of all, here in the center, both lenses are very sharp. So the Canon lens actually shows even a bit less contrast, I'd say, but overall in terms of details, they're pretty sharp, both of them. Now, if we go out to the edges, you see the problem with the NiSi lens. So the Canon lens at f4 out into the edges, we have a slight drop in sharpness, but it's still very, very sharp there. But here on the left side, you see that here towards the edges, the lens is much less sharp. And if we move inward, it gets sharper again. Same is true on the other side. Let's have a look. You see here, down in the edges, there's quite a drop in sharpness. Also here, the upper side, we have the same, and to the right side, it's actually a touch better. So I'd say this is not sharp enough. Down here also this area, and up here it's a little less. So at f4 I personally wouldn't use that lens, which is a bit sad, but yeah, it's typical for many lenses that at their widest they're not necessarily the sharpest when you look at the corners. So now let's look at f5.6 and compare it again. Again, the center area is very sharp on both sides. So if you move downwards to the edge, also both sides very sharp. Let's again go to the right first. And here you see already at f5.6, it's much better. So you don't see so much of a difference anymore. Let's go to the upper side. Also, it's very sharp to the edges. Left side, yeah, there is a little less sharp at the very far edge, but just a touch. So, and down here on the lower left, it's the same. So it's really just this tiny edge. So here the Canon is also better. But now, as we saw in the beginning at f8, this is really where the sweet spot of that lens is. So I honestly didn't notice too much of a difference between the NiSi and the 5 times as expensive Canon. For the wide lens part of the Canon, so Canon 15mm versus NiSi at f8, they are pretty close. So can go to the edges. So here's the NiSi, very sharp towards the edges. Let's go up. Also, and please judge for yourself. So I'm just sharing my impressions, but I show you the 100% here, so you can decide for yourself what you think of that lens. And again, it's a touch less sharp. And yeah, down here, you see the Canon's very sharp to the edges, and also here the NiSi just a tiny bit less if you go to the very outer edge here. But all in all, it's a very sharp lens, especially at that price point. The only thing that's a bit sad is that wide open we have this degradation, which is quite noticeable to the corner, so less sharpness, and that f4 for me personally is not really usable. Otherwise this would have been perfect, because in the past I was actually using also just an f4 lens from Canon, and I could use it for night photography. So f4 would have been enough for certain night photography scenarios. f5.6 on the other hand will not be enough. So in my opinion, if you want to do night photography, so really photograph the stars, this lens might not be enough for you. For other scenarios where you can go to f5.6 or f8, so typical architecture or landscape photography, I think it will be very fine. Now, another thing which I noticed when I did those comparisons, let's have a look here at the Canon image. You see, I shot this one at 3 seconds, f8, versus 4 seconds for the NiSi. So the NiSi seems to swallow half a stop more light than the Canon. So this is something I also noticed. An f4 becomes an f4.5 in terms of light. This is also something to consider. So the Canon seems to let in a bit more light, and the lighting here in this shooting scenario was exactly the same. So it didn't get darker or brighter. I also repeated this, and I had to go half a stop higher with the NiSi to get the same histogram, the same brightness in the image. Okay, so we've now done a couple of indoor tests shooting in my office. I now know how this lens performs and where the sweet spot is in terms of aperture. So what I'm now gonna do is to shoot some real world photos. So here in the city in Nuremberg, there's this nice street which is called the Weisgerbergasse, and I try to photograph it now in blue hour. So once it gets dark and the city lights turn on, I expect to be able to do some nice tests for the Sunstar this lens produces. So it's advertised to produce very nice spikes. So gonna test this then when the lights go on. Till then it's maybe half an hour more, but First of all, let's look at the composition I have here. So I went very low here, shooting a vertical frame, which doesn't happen very often, but yeah, I went very low to have those nice cobbles in the foreground. So this will also help me to judge the sharpness later on. And also with like 15mm, I get in lots of those beautiful buildings around and also some of the street lamps. So this is important for the test. And yeah, I'm gonna have to do some focus stacking. So I'm shooting at f8, maybe also f11. And because this does not focus automatically and I can't employ the automatic focus bracketing for the R5, what I'm gonna try to rely on, just focus very close to the foreground. I just check the scale here, which we have on the side of the lens, so I know where the closest focus point is. And then I'm gonna focus at the background, also check it. And then throughout the evening when I take those photos, I always do it manually, just turning the focus ring, which is very smooth. And I think I'm gonna get a very good gradual transition if I do like 3 or 4 brackets in between. So yeah, it's not as nice as automatic bracketing, but still with this nice scale here, it's gonna work, I think. So now I'm gonna wait maybe half an hour longer until it's getting dark enough. And yeah, the city lights come on and then we're gonna take the photo. Okay, sooner than I thought, and the lights are already on. And I have to say this Sunstar, or the spikes around those lights, they really look fantastic. So I'm very pleased by that. So what I'm gonna do now is also do some bracketing. So not only focus stacking, but also bracketing to get in the complete dynamic range here. But yeah, wow, this really looks nice. And now as it gets darker, the sky turns more blue. I get those nice color contrasts between the warm city lights and then the blue sky. But yeah, I'm very pleased with what I'm seeing on this little display. So yeah, we're gonna check this out later on the big display. But at least the Sunstars look beautiful, and also sharpness wise, it should work because we already tested that indoors. So gonna see how the final photo will look, and I now also maybe change the composition a bit, take a few photos. So the shoot continues, and I want to share with you a bit of my experience now. So one thing, shooting with a manual lens where really everything is manual, including the aperture, if it gets darker, if you shoot with an automatic lens, it will go to the widest while you use the live view or the viewfinder to focus. And then once you take the photo, it will stop down to whatever aperture you've set. This does not work with this lens, so either you have to rely on your live view. If you have a very good one like the R5, that's fine. Otherwise, you just have to always manually go to the widest aperture, so f4, and then back when you take the photo, which is not a big deal because, as I already said, it operates very smoothly. But yeah, it's an additional step you have to do. So yeah, now I'm taking the final photo, and I also took the photos with the 1535 from Canon, so just so we can compare a bit, both the Sunstar and also the sharpness. So again, let's focus on the background. I do bracketing of 3 exposures, already did focus stacking, so this is really the final photo of the evening, I think. And yeah, was a nice test, I think. We had beautiful subject, beautiful lights here, and could really test the Sunstar, and I'm quite impressed, at least from what I'm seeing on this little display. Yeah, looking forward how it looks on the big display. Also, what we're gonna be able to tell here is how the distortion of the lens is, because all those buildings, they have many vertical lines, although I think the buildings are not straight. Looking at them, they're leaning inward a bit, but still, I hope we can tell a bit compared to the 1535 lens from Canon, how distortion is working, also vignetting. But yeah, otherwise, gonna pack it up now, head back to the car and go home. So, see you in the office. So you've seen the final images from the shoot, and I have to say I'm quite impressed by the results, especially also here if we look at the raw file. This Sunstar is just very unique. and I really liked it. Now I also want to show you the comparison to the Canon lens, which arguably the Canon lens has always produced some of the best Sunstars and still do. Now let's have a comparison here. So looking at the left side is the NiSi Sunstar, which is very distinct, 10 spikes, very clean. And then here the Canon Sunstar, which has quite a few more spikes, but also quite a nice look. So it's here actually whatever preference you have, more spikes, less spikes. But I think I would even give this one to NiSi because I really like that Sunstar a lot. They really did a great work, and I also tested this. It will look the same even at f4. So the Sunstar already wide open looks nice, but there at f4 we know from the indoor tests the sharpness will not be enough. But yeah, let's now check the sharpness here in a real world shooting scenario. I just gonna zoom in and yeah, again, let's compare the lenses. So the Canon I actually shot at f9.5, the NiSi at f8. So here you see both photos which were focused on the background. You see here the Canon one is a little more yellowish because it was darker already, so the artificial light was already more dominant. But yeah, in terms of sharpness, you see both are very good. So looking here at the text, here again the Sunstar, even for that tiny light, looks quite nice. And also if we go up here, so for Canon it was already a little darker, but here for the NiSi you see chromatic aberrations are not too big of a deal here. So for sure I activated the chromatic aberration reduction, but even if I deactivate it, you see there is not much, so just very, very tiny fringes. So I'd say in terms of chromatic aberrations, you should not expect a lot of them, which is very good for this lens. So here you see those fringes. Those are a little more drastic, but quite easy to remove, even without a lens profile, because I don't have a lens profile. Which brings me to the next point. There's not too much distortion in that lens. So let's compare it to the Canon. You see that the buildings in fact lean inwards, so it's not a distortion of the lens, and they look pretty similar. So there's not too much distortion going on. So here this line is quite straight, this line is straight. So I'd say don't worry about distortions, don't worry about chromatic aberrations with the NiSi lens, and also the sharpness is pretty good if you stop down to like f8 as I did here. Now finally, what can you do with such a lens? If you do focus stacking, exposure bracketing, same as you would do with any other lens, how will the sharpness be? And let's zoom in. This is a final processed image. We're looking at it 100%, so the front where I did focus stacking. Let's go to the edges. So I get it sharp. Let's move up. Details, here you see a lot of details in that image. Let's go up to the upper part, details here, and yeah, overall a lot of details in that image. So all in all, I could use this lens to create professional architecture photos. Also, I'd guess professional landscape photos. Just didn't have a landscape to photograph, but this gives me a good impression. So we've made it to the end of the video, and I think it's time for the final verdict. So whom do I think is this lens for? So obviously size and price are a big factor here. For me personally, I'm kind of the photographer who takes 80% of his photos in the range of 15 to 35 millimeters. So I just own two lenses, which is the wide angle Canon 15-35 and a long lens 70-200. So for me personally, this lens is not the right lens because I nearly exclusively shoot wide angle photos or in that range, and I really want a lens which covers a bit of a range where I have flexibility. That's just the kind of photographer I am. But if you're a photographer who has maybe a normal lens, so 24 to 70 or 205 plus the telelens, so you cover this complete range, and you already have two heavy lenses. Now you're thinking, okay, you also want to take wide angle photos, you like to take architecture photos, landscape photos, where you want to go really wide. So yeah, that might be the case now that you don't want to add just another big heavy lens. And don't want to spend $2,000 for that lens. So for this use case, I think this is a nice addition to your kit, because this one's tiny. You can just additionally throw it into your pack in addition to your normal lenses, and now have the option to also go very wide, and I think that's perfect. Also, as you've seen with the photos, I shot those on the R5, so 45 megapixels. I think the lens can keep up if you're shooting at f8 or f11, so the resolution is good enough so you can take professional photos with it. You don't have all the automatic focus, automatic aperture. It's minimalistic, but for that reason they could focus on build quality and keeping the price low, so it's always a trade-off here. But yeah, I think this lens can be for such types of photographers. And also, if you don't have the most expensive Canon camera, like the R5 for example, if you for example have an RP, which is the entry-level camera, it's much tinier, it's lighter, then you don't want to use a big fat 1535 on it. It feels a little awkward. You might also look for something in this price range here, less than 500 euros, and then this is a good option in my opinion. But as I said, make up your own mind. You've now seen the close-up photos, you know what quality it can produce. You've seen the Sunstar, and architecture, landscape, this lens is good for. Not so much for night photography, as I said. And also finally, in case you want to get this lens and you get it first and put it onto your camera, the camera will not release. This was what happened to me. So I was kind of confused first, what's up, because this lens doesn't talk to the camera. The camera actually doesn't know there's a lens on it. So what you have to do if you run into that problem, which is not a problem at all, you just need to make sure you have the right setting, which is in the cameras. You find somewhere the setting to allow the camera to release the shutter even without a lens. And this you have to turn on, and then you can go shooting with that lens. So this is just something I wanted to tell you. And now, I hope you like that review. Hope you find it interesting, and see you in the next video. Bye.